Lionel Richie canceled his concert in Chicago tonight at the United Center after an onstage health scare during Wednesday night show in Minnesota.
And now we're hearing from fans who are worried about the Grammy winner's health.
For 50 years, Lionel Richie has built his entire identity around one promise. No matter how tired you are, no matter how heavy your week has been, he is going to get you up on your feet. That is the whole premise of All Night Long. That is the whole premise of Dancing on the Ceiling. It is a career constructed on stamina, on the idea that a 70-something-year-old man can still command an arena floor for 90 straight minutes and leave it soaked in sweat and joy. So when word broke that Richie had been rushed off a stage in Minnesota and driven to a hospital in the middle of a song, it did not feel like ordinary celebrity gossip. It felt like watching a piece of the soundtrack of an entire generation suddenly go quiet. 10 days of near-total silence followed, and when Richie finally spoke, what he said was warm, it was gracious, and it left almost as many questions open as it closed. Today we are going to walk through exactly what happened on that stage, what has been confirmed by hospitals and reporters, what was only ever a secondhand guess from a bandmate, and what Richie himself chose to say once he finally broke his silence. No dramatics, no invented diagnosis, just the timeline, laid out the way it actually happened. The tour was supposed to be a victory lap. Richie teamed up with Earth, Wind and Fire for a joint outing built around one simple idea in the title itself: keep the party going all night long. The opening show landed at the Grand Casino Arena in St. Paul, Minnesota, and by every account, the early hours of that night were exactly what fans had paid for. Richie posted from backstage before the doors opened, clearly buzzing about rehearsals and soundcheck, sharing the kind of easy, high-energy excitement that has defined his public persona for decades. Earth, Wind, and Fire opened the night with their trademark horn-driven spectacle, and once Richie took the stage, the two acts blended into the kind of nostalgia-soaked celebration these co-headlining tours are designed to deliver. For close to an hour, nothing seemed unusual. Richie worked the stage the way he always has, leaning into the crowd, trading energy with the audience, moving through a set list built from a catalog most people in that arena had known their entire lives. Then came Dancing on the Ceiling. It is not a ballad. It is one of the most physically demanding songs in his set, a full-tempo, full-movement number that Richie has performed standing for the entirety of his career. Partway through it, fans in the crowd noticed him pause. He walked toward one of the stage platforms and sat down, still singing, but visibly different than moments before. People who were there later described a strange shift in the room, the kind of unease that spreads through a crowd once they sense something off-script is happening. Even if nobody can quite name what it is yet, Richie did not try to hide it. He leaned into his microphone and told the arena directly that he was feeling dizzy, adding with the kind of self-deprecating humor that has always been part of his stage persona, that when your body tells you to sit down, you sit down. He even pointed out, half joking, that this was the first time in his career he had ever performed that particular song from a seated position, and that it probably was not a great sign. The crowd laughed along with him. In the moment, it read like classic Richie, turning an awkward beat into a bit, the same instinct that has carried him through decades of live performance. Nobody in that building had any idea how quickly the situation behind the scenes was about to escalate. After the moment on the platform, Richie moved to the piano and delivered a seated rendition of 3 Times a Lady, one of his most tender ballads, and one that did not demand the same physical intensity as the song before it. Then he left the stage. Most of the audience assumed it was simply an intermission, a short pause built into a long, high-energy show featuring 2 full acts. They had no way of knowing that paramedics were already being called to the venue. Nearly 40 minutes passed with no announcement. During that stretch, Earth, Wind and Fire saxophonist Dino Saldo walked out to address the crowd directly. He explained, in general terms, that Richie was not feeling well and would not be able to finish the performance. The show, originally planned to run around 90 minutes, ended at roughly the 55-minute mark. Behind the curtain, paramedics had already met Richie and transported him by ambulance to a nearby hospital. The St. Paul Fire Department later confirmed to reporters that an adult man had been transported from the arena that night to a local hospital by their EMS crew, though officials, following standard practice, did not release his name or any medical specifics. Outlets covering the story at the time described the hospital visit as a precautionary measure, language that came from sources close to Richie's camp rather than from Richie himself. That distinction matters because it set the tone for everything that followed. A precaution is not the same as a diagnosis. It tells you that doctors wanted to be careful, not what they were being careful about. This is the point in almost every celebrity health story where speculation starts to outrun the facts, and it is worth pausing here to separate the two clearly, because that gap is really the heart of this entire story. Confirmed. Richie told a live audience, in his own words, that he felt dizzy and strange during the performance. Confirmed. Paramedics responded and transported him to a hospital as a precaution. Confirmed. His team postponed 2 upcoming shows, one in Chicago and one in Columbus, on the advice of doctors, so that he could rest. Confirmed. The tour was expected to resume days later in Pittsburgh. Not confirmed by Richie, by his representatives, or by any hospital. An actual diagnosis. Nobody in an official capacity ever named a specific medical condition. Richie's team released a short statement apologizing to ticket holders for the inconvenience and promising rescheduled dates, but it contained no mention of test results, no mention of what caused the dizziness, and no mention of how serious the hospital stay actually was. It was polite, it was brief, and it left the exact question everyone wanted answered completely untouched. Think about the scale of what was actually being decided behind the scenes in those first hours. Postponing 2 arena shows is not a minor inconvenience. It means renegotiating dates with 2 separate venues in 2 separate cities, managing ticket refunds or exchanges for thousands of fans, and pulling a full touring production, band, crew, equipment off the road on short notice. Tours do not grind to a halt like that over something trivial. Somebody with medical authority told Richie's team to slow down, and his team listened. In the days that followed, one detail started circulating widely enough that a lot of fans simply accepted it as the full answer. Earth, Wind and Fire drummer John Paris spoke with a Minnesota newspaper and relayed that, according to what Richie had told him personally, the singer was feeling a little dehydrated. On its face, that is a completely plausible explanation. Dehydration is a real and common issue for performers in their 70s, working understage lighting night after night, especially early in a tour before a body has adjusted to the physical rhythm of touring life. It would explain the dizziness. It would explain the need to sit. It would even explain a hospital visit taken purely as a precaution. But here's the detail that got lost in a lot of the coverage that followed. That explanation did not come from Lionel Richie. It came from a bandmate, describing a private conversation secondhand. That is worth taking seriously. But it is not the same thing as a public figure confirming his own medical situation. There is a meaningful difference between someone close to him said he mentioned feeling dehydrated, and Richie himself stepping in front of a camera or writing a post that says, in his own words, "I was dehydrated. That's what happened." As of the most recent reporting available, Richie never made that second kind of statement. Multiple entertainment outlets that covered the story in the weeks that followed specifically noted that he had not gone on record with any cause for the hospitalization at all. That gap between a friend's secondhand account and the artist's own silence is exactly the space where online speculation tends to grow fastest. And for 10 full days, that space stayed wide open. While Richie said nothing publicly on his own platforms, he also did not disappear from the stage. Just 6 days after being taken from an arena by ambulance, he returned to perform in Pittsburgh. From there, the tour rolled forward into Detroit. For an artist who had just gone through a very public, very visible health scare, getting back on stage that quickly sent a message all on its own, even without a single explanatory sentence attached to it. By all accounts, his return in Pittsburgh was not framed as some emotional comeback speech. There was no tearful address to the crowd about what he had been through, no detailed play-by-play of his recovery. He simply performed, cracked jokes about the very moment that had sent him to the hospital, and let the show carry the message that he was, at minimum, well enough to be back doing his job. He reportedly told the Pittsburgh crowd that he had scared himself just as much as he had scared them, and joked about the flood of unsolicited advice he'd received in the days since, Everything from friends suggesting he ride a scooter across the stage to more old-fashioned home remedies. That choice, showing up and performing rather than issuing a formal statement, tells you something about how Richie was handling the situation from day one. Rather than getting ahead of the story with a detailed medical explanation, he let his continued presence on stage do most of the talking. It is a strategy plenty of performers lean on when they would rather keep a private health matter from becoming a defining headline. Whether that reads as reassuring or frustrating probably depends on how much any of us feel entitled to know about a 77-year-old man's private medical business in the first place. Meanwhile, away from the stage, his ex-wife Brenda Harvey Richie posted a brief reassurance on social media just 2 days after the incident, telling concerned fans that he was okay and would be back performing soon. It was a small gesture, but for a few days it was one of the only direct signals from anyone close to him that things were trending in the right direction. On July 4th, exactly 10 days after the ambulance ride in St. Paul, Richie posted to Instagram for the first time addressing the entire ordeal. The tone was warm and grateful, and notably, almost entirely focused outward, on his fans, rather than inward, on his own health. He thanked people for every message and every kind word he had received, said he was doing well, and expressed gratitude for the outpouring of support. He specifically called out his recent shows in Pittsburgh and Detroit as genuine highlights, describing the energy in the crowd and the memories made in those rooms. He closed by looking ahead to his next stop in Toronto, inviting fans there to keep the party going with him. Read that post carefully, because what it contains matters just as much as what it leaves out. Richie confirmed that he considers himself recovered enough to be back performing full shows night after night. He confirmed gratitude for the concern shown by fans and by fellow artists who reached out. What he did not do, anywhere in that message, was name a diagnosis. He did not confirm dehydration. He did not confirm any underlying condition. He did not use blunt reassurance language the way some celebrities do when they want to shut a health story down completely and permanently. Instead, he offered warmth, and he offered proof of life through the simple fact of getting back up there and doing the job. That combination, humor on stage paired with vagueness about the actual cause, has been consistent throughout this entire story. He has been perfectly willing to joke about feeling dizzy in front of thousands of people. He has been perfectly willing to publicly thank fans for their concern. But the specific medical explanation behind what actually happened that night in Minnesota has remained something only he and his medical team appear to know. Based on everything that has been reported by fire department officials, entertainment outlets, and people directly connected to the tour, there is no credible source confirming that Richie was hiding a serious diagnosis that he has now quietly admitted to. There's no verified report of a specific condition being revealed. What can actually be pieced together from confirmed reporting looks like this. Richie told a live crowd he felt dizzy and strange. He was taken to a hospital that night as a precaution. He postponed 2 shows on the advice of doctors. A bandmate later said Richie described feeling somewhat dehydrated, though Richie himself never confirmed that as the cause. 10 days later, Richie thanked his fans publicly and said he was doing well, without naming any specific medical explanation. That is the difference between the version of this story built for maximum clicks and the version that is actually supported by verified facts. The dramatic version writes itself, a beloved icon hiding a secret health battle behind a famous smile. The version backed by actual reporting is more restrained and, honestly, in a lot of ways, more reassuring. A frightening moment on stage, a precautionary hospital stay, a short pause in the schedule, and a return to full shows within less than a week. Does that mean there is nothing more beneath the surface? Not necessarily. Richie is 77 years old, performing physically demanding, high-energy shows night after night on a lengthy tour schedule. Whether dehydration was the complete explanation, one factor among several, or simply the easiest thing to tell a worried bandmate in the moment, is something only Richie and the people treating him actually know for certain. Unless he chooses to share more in the future, the rest of us are left reading between the lines of a short, gracious message written mostly to thank the people who showed up for him. To understand why this moment landed so hard with fans, it helps to remember just how long Richie has spent building the opposite reputation. He came up through the Commodores in the 1970s, then broke out as a solo act in the early 1980s with a run of hits that essentially defined an entire era of adult contemporary and R&B radio. All night long, Say You, Say Me, Hello. Truly, decade after decade, his catalog has stayed in constant rotation, not just on classic radio but in weddings, graduations, and karaoke nights across the world. Then came a second act few artists his age ever get, a long-running seat as a judge on American Idol, which introduced him to an entirely new, younger audience that had no memory of his 1980s peak but instantly recognized his warmth and easy charisma on camera. That combination, the deep catalog and the newer television fame, is part of why this tour with Earth, Wind and Fire was positioned as such a big event in the first place. Two legacy acts, both still capable of selling out arenas, joining forces for a run built entirely around the idea of nonstop celebration. Richie has spent years cultivating an image of a performer who simply does not slow down, who treats every show like a party he is personally responsible for keeping alive. That is precisely why watching him sit down mid-song, something he had reportedly never done before in his entire history performing, dancing on the ceiling, felt so jarring to the people in that Minnesota crowd. It was not just a scary moment. It was a crack in an image that had held steady for decades. It is also worth noting that this was not the first time health questions have followed Richie in recent years. In interviews and in his own writing, he has spoken openly about other challenges tied to getting older while still maintaining a physically demanding touring schedule, including past vocal strain that affected his singing voice at points during his career. He has also been candid in recent years about a much more personal revelation, disclosing in his own memoir that he lives with ADHD, a diagnosis he did not fully understand or have language for until later in life. He has described struggling as a child to sit still or focus, not realizing until adulthood that what he was experiencing had a name. None of that directly explains the events in St. Paul, but it does paint a picture of a performer who has, at different points, been willing to be honest about his health and his limits when he has chosen to be. That history makes his silence about this specific incident stand out even more. If he has been open before, why hold back now? The most reasonable answer may simply be that this particular moment, an acute on-stage scare rather than a long-term condition he has had years to process privately, felt different to disclose in real time. There is also a broader pattern worth acknowledging here, because Richie's situation is far from the first time fans have watched a beloved veteran performer go through something like this. A frightening moment happens in front of a live audience. Someone in the artist's inner circle, a bandmate, a manager, an old friend, offers a casual, reassuring explanation to a reporter. Then the artist themselves goes quiet for days or weeks, sometimes never directly addressing exactly what happened at all. Fans have seen this exact sequence play out with other legacy musicians over the years, and it tends to follow the same emotional arc. Panic, rumor, a partial explanation from someone once removed, and then, eventually, either a brief reassurance from the artist or nothing further at all. Richie's story followed that same well-worn path almost exactly, right up until the moment he finally posted on July 4th. Understanding that pattern matters, because it helps explain why so much of the online conversation around Richie's hospitalization filled in gaps with theories that had no actual sourcing behind them. Some fans speculated about exhaustion after years of non-stop touring. Others raised more serious concerns simply because of his age. Still others wondered whether decades of performing under hot stage lighting was finally catching up with him physically. All of those theories are understandable reactions to genuine concern for someone people have loved for 50 years. None of them, however, were ever confirmed by Richie, by a doctor, or by anyone with direct knowledge of his condition. They were guesses filling a silence that his own team had left wide open, and it is worth remembering that distinction every time a new theory starts circulating. It is worth thinking through why a performer in Richie's position might deliberately keep the medical specifics private, even from an audience that clearly cares about his well-being. At 77, still selling out arenas, still touring alongside a legacy act like Earth, Wind and Fire, there's a real incentive to control the narrative around his own health rather than hand it over entirely to headlines and comment sections. A single, detailed medical statement can follow a performer for the rest of their career, shaping how every future headline gets written and how every future ticket gets sold. A short, warm post that simply says he is doing well leaves far more room for Richie to keep being exactly what his audience wants him to be. The man behind All Night Long. Back on stage, moving forward, rather than the subject of a running conversation about aging in the spotlight. That does not mean fans are wrong to want more detail. It simply means that, based on everything verified so far, more detail is not something Richie has chosen to give. And until he does, every other explanation still circulating online remains exactly that. An explanation, not a confirmed fact. Here is what can be said with real confidence. Lionel Richie scared a full arena of fans, spent time in a hospital as a precaution, paused his tour for less than a week, and came back sooner than almost anyone expected, joking about the very moment that had sent him there in the first place. Through all of it, he never confirmed the one specific detail so many people were hoping to hear. Instead, 10 days after an ambulance pulled away from a Minnesota arena, he chose gratitude over explanation, presence over disclosure, and a promise to keep the tour moving forward over a detailed account of what actually happened that night. Whether that is the right call, choosing privacy over a full public accounting, or whether an artist with this much history with his fans owes them a fuller explanation, is a genuinely fair question, and reasonable people land on different sides of it. What is not fair is treating a secondhand comment from a bandmate, or 10 days of silence, as proof of some hidden truth Richie has finally confessed to. The facts, as they actually stand today, are more measured than that, and in their own way, a lot less alarming. There's also something worth sitting with in how quickly Richie moved from an ambulance ride to a full arena show. 6 days is not a long recovery window for anyone, let alone a man in his late 70s who had just been seen visibly struggling in front of thousands of people. That speed says something on its own, regardless of what any statement does or does not confirm. Either the situation truly was as minor as a bandmate's secondhand comment suggested, or Richie simply made the personal decision that getting back to work mattered more to him than extending his recovery time, doctor's orders aside. Both explanations are plausible. Both are, in their own way, very consistent with the image he has built over 50 years in this business. A performer who would rather be back in front of a crowd than home explaining himself to a camera. It is also fair to point out that Richie is hardly the first performer of his generation to face this exact balancing act between public curiosity and private recovery. Aging gracefully in an industry built on constant visibility is its own kind of tightrope walk, and every artist who has toured deep into their 70s has had to decide, sooner or later, how much of their body's limits they are willing to share with the people who buy tickets to watch them defy those limits. Richie's answer, at least for now, has been to share just enough to reassure everyone that he is fine, and not one detail more. So we will leave it to you. Do you think Lionel Richie owes his fans a fuller explanation of what happened that night in Minnesota? Or is a 77-year-old man entitled to keep his own medical business exactly as private as he wants it to stay? Let us know what you think in the comments, and if you want to stay caught up as more details emerge, make sure you are subscribed. We will see you in the next one.